Hey, we're Group 1, and we'll be presenting on issues in the labor market. Did you know that Jamaica's BPO sector is estimated to have lost over $1 billion in revenue due to the ongoing COVID-19 pandemic? Jamaica's BPO sector is a huge contributor to the economy and houses over 40,000 jobs in the country. The introduction of the COVID-19 pandemic, however, placed a spin on that, causing businesses in the sector to conform to the government's COVID-19 control mandates, such as the work from home policy. As such, the contractual agreement of employment between employees and businesses had to unavoidably change. Employees having to work from home was not only a shift in the working environment, but it brought its challenge of staff incurring higher utility consumptions in their homes. An observed increase in electricity bills, for instance, is one illustration. This then not only became a challenge to the workers at home, but to their contractors, as their place of employment now needed to compensate for their incurred costs through their salaries. One avenue businesses in the BPO could do so is by using the classical economics theory of supply and demand. In short, the theory of supply and demand is one that explains the interaction between the sellers of a resource and the buyers of that resource. As prices generally increase, people are willing to supply more and demand less, vice versa when prices falls. Using the theory of supply and demand, therefore, businesses in the BPO sector can compensate for the work from home cost of staff due to COVID-19 by decreasing the amount of full-time employees to increase the wages for remaining workers, decreasing the daily use of machine capital to decrease the operational cost, and extending work from home hours to increase productivity and revenue. Firstly, as stated in our thesis, decreasing the amount of full-time employees to increase the wages for remaining workers is one strategy for compensating the salaries of staff given COVID-19 protocols such as the work from home mandate. As discussed before, work from home policies caused employees to incur increased personal utility costs, which their workplaces needed to compensate. These businesses don't magically generate money. Hence, they had to find an equitable compromise, one of which was to lay off a number of workers employed full-time, decreasing the supply of labor. The proportionate staff cut henceforth created room for the wider mass of staff to have a greater distribution of revenue across their wages, meeting the increased demand for wage compensation. This can be observed to conform with the law of demand, which illustrates that whenever the price of a good or service demanded increases, the quantity of that good or service demanded falls. In this case, as the need for higher wages grew, it could be considered that the price of labor increased, after which the quantity of labor demanded fell, as demonstrated by the laying off of workers. One example of this COVID-19 inflicted issue in the BPO sector is with advanced call center technologies, which had about 30% reduction of staff in order to better be able to meet their operational costs and compromise the wage demands. This was further observed by their Vice President and CFO, Jimmy Griffiths, commenting on their expenditure that these costs include additional payroll, transportation costs due to curfews and shutdown, etc. The Alarica call center was another business a part of this scenario, where they converted over 60% of their total workforce to working at home, after which they had to temporarily put some employees on furlough/layoff to better support salary negotiations across their staff. Chief Marketing Officer Colson Hiller, in summary, went on to comment on the situation. They have mainly moved workers to a furlough situation where they're in temporary suspension of employment or their contract. Lastly, the ITEL BPO call center was another company to lay off workers to support salary compensation, influenced by the theory of supply and demand. Yoni Ipston, founding chairman and CEO of ITEL BPO, said that the company had to lay off about 400 employees temporarily, as their company had an about 25% drop in revenue, and in order to keep both itself afloat and majority of staff who would have naturally experienced higher utility costs from working from home.
Secondly, COVID-19 measures such as the work from home policy caused businesses in the BPO sector to decrease their use of machine capital in order to decrease their operational costs, which in turn allowed them to facilitate wage compensations for employees. The use of machine capital such as computers and air conditions are vital to business operations. Whilst they play a part in having work done, they also however cost businesses through their inflicted utility costs. With the reduction of an in-office staff complement due to the work-from-home policy, businesses no longer need to use its regular daily supply of machineries given that less workers are present. Hence, cutting back on the usage of machine capital will help businesses to incur less of an operational cost, and the expenditure saved can once again be spread across their staff to alleviate their need for salary compensation. This scenario is one that also ties in with the law of demand. In this case, with the ramifications of the pandemic on businesses, the ongoing cost of employing capital became relatively more expensive. Henceforth, firms in the BPO had to cut back on their provision of capital, thus increasing the supply of extra expenditure they could distribute to employees, since less machines were being used, which led to a subsequent reduction in utility costs. Information sourced from Conducting Operations Manager Alric Donaldson from Intellect BPO resonates with this. Donaldson briefed that the company had to retract a set of air conditioning units to aid in the reduction of their overhead costs, which in the end led to a significant decrease in their monthly light bill on average of $50,000, giving the business room for salary compensation for some of its remote working staff. Tactical Development Solutions Limited was another business that basically reflected the same situation. An in-office call had their human resources manager, Ronaldo Miller, briefing that the company had to cut several AC units in April 2020, shortly after the birth of COVID-19. Since most of their staff wouldn't be in office given the shift to a remote working environment, this again had them incurring less monthly utility costs and giving them the leverage to aid in wage compensation for their staff. ITEL BPO again was another firm faced with a relatively high expenditure on the side of transportation, which consequently alluded to it having to cut back on the amount of daily traveling to commute assigned employees and attend to essential activities of the business, hence giving way to an overall mitigation of gas expense, which could once again be spread across wages for their remote workers.
Finally, in keeping with the respective restrictions that would have been implemented to curb or mitigate the spread of the COVID-19 virus, businesses within the BPO sector would have been faced with the task of trying to generate revenue for their respective brands while also properly compensating persons employed in the sector given these unprecedented circumstances. Not having the luxury of having staff coming to work to complete tasks on a daily basis would see this sector basically collapsing, and this would be bad for both the employees who would have been affected and also the economy, as employment rate would have dipped significantly. So, in keeping the sector booming, the necessary stakeholders would have to come up with the notion of working from home as a means of increasing productivity and also revenue. In keeping with the theory of supply and demand, having a strong demand for human capital to carry out daily tasks to keep the sector afloat would see the BPO companies having to become more innovative where it comes on to fill in this demand, and the most feasible avenue of filling this demand would have been through extending work from home hours, as facilitating staff in one location would not have been possible given the strict social distancing protocols which came with the COVID-19 virus. Instead of closing down the sector, stakeholders would give employees the privilege of completing tasks in their own spaces from their homes. This in the end would serve as a solid foundation for the equilibrium, as this would be the mutual ground on which demand for human capital is met with an ample supply of human capital, which would see the sector staying afloat while also keeping productivity rates high and also generating revenue. Individuals employed in this sector stand to benefit from this in the sense that working extra hours would simply mean receiving additional income, and typically overtime wages can be as much as double the regular wage which employees are paid. An example that can be used to illustrate this point is HGS, which is a company in the BPO sector. While speaking with the Human Resource Department, it was communicated that the company offers work-from-home employees the option of working 2 additional hours in seasons where demand for human capital is higher. In offering this to employees, the company would have paid these employees extra for the additional hours that they would have worked in addition to their regular 8 hours, and as a result, this would see employees earning more where salary is concerned. Productivity would also naturally increase, as if, for example, a total of 10 employees work an additional 2 hours, and each of these employees should take an additional 10 calls, then that would amount to 100 calls being taken, which can be worded as 100 more customers being satisfied. A second organization within the BPO sector that has adopted this principle is Sutherland Global Services, where the Human Resource Department also indicated that they give work-from-home employees the privilege of working a total of 60 hours per week, 20 more than the regular 40-hour work week, and the company would pay its employees extra for working anything over 40 hours, which the average work week would consist of. This can be further broken down to an employee working from home having the option of working 4 additional hours daily. The third organization within the BPO sector which has extended work from home hours so employees can benefit is Ibex Global, and according to their Human Resource Department, this company provides employees working from home the privilege of working an additional hour each day. This would amount to an additional 5 hours per week. These illustrations show how companies within the BPO sector use additional working hours for employees working from home to boost productivity. This is so because of the fact that more work would have been done by these employees in the extended time frame which had been provided by companies within the BPO sector. And in doing this, the sector would have filled the extra demand for human capital with an ample supply of employees working from home. In doing this, the employees are properly compensated as they would have earned additional income, and the company would have also earned greater revenues.
Ultimately, and as previously expressed, we can see that businesses that operate under the guidelines of a BPO organization in Jamaica can find numerous ways to mitigate the work-from-home costs of their staff. Using supply and demand, these organizations may opt for measures such as hiring mainly temporary staff, leading to more workers that can benefit from compensation for the inconvenience of additional work-related costs. What if this measure is not for your BPO business? Well, other effective measures that members of the sector could use in increasing allowance for compensation include not only reducing overhead costs through various administrative activities, but you could also stretch working hours to provide profitable activity for your BPO business. Businesses in the BPO sector may have seen financial difficulty throughout the length of the pandemic, losing anywhere upwards of $1 billion in revenue due to strict government guidelines. But as we draw near to going back to normal, the future looks bright for the BPO sector, which has recorded that it is on track to hire anywhere upwards from 7,500 new workers, about 1,000 more people our largest operational cruise ship today can accommodate by March 2022. So it is on that thought that we end off today's session of Wednesdays with the Economist. We just want to send a big shout out to today's sponsor, Anif Campbell & Co., for sponsoring this week's video. I'm Jason, and with me we have Randean. Over on this side we have Moses, and to the left we have Ricardo. Together we make up The Economists, and you can catch us here this and every Wednesday on Wednesdays with The Economists. Keep safe, and we'll see you next time.